Welcome to the World Bank Group at the COP26 in Glasgow. I'm Axel van Trotzenberg. I'm the Managing Director of Operations at the bank and here to talk about climate change and development policy in the world's most vulnerable economies. The connection between climate change, poverty, inequality, and human well-being is increasingly visible. Unchecked, climate change will push more than 130 million people into poverty over the next 10 years, undoing hard-won development gains. That is why, at the World Bank, we are doing more, bringing more finance, more expertise, and more support to countries at the front lines of climate change. Using our Climate Change Action Plan as a guide, we have developed a new tool to connect the climate journey and development journey for each country. This analysis will be brought together in what we are calling a Country Climate and Development Report, in short CCDR. This new diagnostic tool examines how climate change is impacting the country and what the country can do to tackle climate change in ways that are in line with its own unique circumstances and development plan. We focus on key systems that must be transformed to address climate change and achieve a resilient, low-carbon future. This means we need to affect energy, agriculture, food, water and land, cities, transport and manufacturing, to just name a few sectors that needs to transform. We're now working on more than 25 of these reports. The systematic approach is the same for each country. The outcomes are very different, bespoke to each country's context. We're here today to learn more about these new journeys, and we have invited some high-level officials from the developing countries we serve. And let me start first in talking with Dr. Yasmin Fouad. She's the Minister of Environment of the Arab Republic of Egypt. Thank you very much for joining. Afterwards, we will be joined by the Ministers of Forestry and Natural Resources of the Republic of Malawi and the Minister of Environment and Urbanization of Turkey. But let me now first to turn to you, Mr. Minister. When we are thinking, first of all, I have to congratulate you that Egypt will host next year's COP27. But how do you see this new diagnostic tool for contributing to the agenda, particularly in Egypt?
Okay, thank you very much for that question. One important thing that maybe when you mentioned the CCDR, that new tool of the bank, it's very interesting that you can look at the climate change from the perspective of economy and how that links to the GDP. You know, that's very similar to the cost of environmental degradation when the bank first started that. So you're looking at the environment, it's very technical, very scientific from the perspective of the economy, from the perspective of the GDP. That would make more sense because that means numbers, and converting the science into numbers will make the equation much more different. Egypt, just a few hours ago, launched its national climate change strategy until 2050. We have 5 objectives. Guess what? The first objective is how can we sustain the sustainable economic growth and low carbon development while still facing climate change. And the second goal would talk about more resilient future. And then you talk about the dynamics of the climate finance, the governance, and the R&D. The 5 objectives would set the road, our vision until 2050, and what needs to be done with the indicators and so forth. The CCDR would come as a tool to translate that and help us to prioritize what should come first, what would bring the quick wins, and what do we need to exert more effort in. We know that adaptation is a priority for the country, but we have 3 areas: agriculture, coastal, and water. What needs more attention than other 2, or what can bring more wins to the country and stabilize its economy in the fight against climate change?
Yeah, we see this also, that climate change is not an end in itself, but it has to be seen in this broader context. And I think that is the interesting thing, and also our hope that we will trigger together a very informed discussion about what kind of priorities you see. How do you see this also with the poverty agenda? And because people will be affected, but it's not only that's the downside of it, but there are of course also a lot of opportunities with new technology. Just mentioned agriculture. Agriculture can be transformed, so can create also new opportunities where you combine in a smart way combating climate change, but at the same time creating new opportunity for economic development. How do you hope that that discussion will be developed?
Thank you very much. I believe that there is that negative side of looking at climate change and how it pulls people more into poverty traps. I know that, and this is science said so. But being optimistic and looking at the bright side, we would like to see it as an opportunity to be seized. We've gone through that in Egypt. For example, each year in Egypt, we had that black cloud that would come during the autumn. And the part of it is mainly related to the open burning of the rice straw. And from that perspective, we started to look at that differently. We started creating jobs instead of the small farmers burning the rice straw. We started to bring them recycling materials, so they get the rice straw, they recycle that, they bring compost, they have more income. So we changed the crisis that Egypt used to face for 10 years, consecutive 10 years. Egypt was suffering from that during the months of September and October, and people would go to the hospital to an opportunity. And now we're generating more income in the governorates that cultivate the rice. So I see it the same. With climate change, the more we think of locally led initiatives and locally led projects, especially in the adaptation area, the more we can convert the crisis that would be thought into more of opportunities. For an example, now we're starting the preparation of our national adaptation plan. We don't want that plan to be business as usual. We don't want that plan to tell you these are the sectors, these are the program, this is the project, because this will not do any good. We want that plan to be more innovative. How can we engage the private sector? How can the banking sector work more and have the adaptation projects as bankable projects, because that's the bottleneck of the adaptation, not like the mitigation. And how can we generate more locally led adaptation, small and medium-sized projects?
So before I let you go, I know you have the next meeting, so just a quick, because you mentioned that is about the private sector. How do you see that evolving in Egypt? This is a big challenge everywhere, but how do you see, and also the engagement we can have together when we are developing to get really the private sector into the debate, but ultimately with the hope that they will make also the necessary investments?
We have started an interesting story of creating a whole new enabling environment in Egypt for doing business better. We call it that in the environment sector. In the last few years, we see that there were more opportunities for the private sector. So we have now a big bulk of the private sector doing an extended producer responsibility for the plastic recycling once the country has announced its national municipal solid waste management program, and once the country has endorsed its first waste management law. We can see the private sector investing now in the waste to energy once the country has got its economic incentive of the feed-in tariff. Now we're working on a full package for the private sector in the transport sector and in sectors that would enable them more into large-scale projects, but link that to the small ones. What I wanted to say is that for each and every sector in the environment that tackles climate change, there is an opportunity for the private sector, but that opportunity will never be really available without tapping on the banking sector, and this is what I was discussing this morning, and changing the mindset of the local banking sector to more climate-friendly projects and risk assessment.
Samisa, I fear I have to leave it here, but thank you for joining, but also to give a kind of sneak preview of what is to await us in the debate. I think it's very exciting. I think certainly I think we want to work closely with you in the run-up also for the COP27. I think it would be an exciting story to tell. I think there are many challenges, but as you say, there are many, many opportunities that we can do, and we can explore that together. Thank you for coming.
You're welcome.
Highly appreciate
Thank you very much.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
Hello and welcome back to part 2 of my conversation with leaders on the climate change challenge as well as the development challenges. We just heard from the Minister of Environment of Egypt, and I'm now joined by the Minister of Forestry and Natural Resources of the Republic of Malawi, Nancy Tembo, welcome, as well as by the Director in the Ministry of Finance, Serhat Göksel. Thank you for joining me here in the discussion. And let me first turn to you, Minister Tembo. It is, thank you for being here, but also I know that nature-based solutions play a key role in Malawi's climate change strategy. And can you take a little bit, tell me more about this approach and how we can use this approach also in this new analytical tool where we're analyzing in the bank climate and development challenges?
Well, thank you very much for having me. I come from Malawi. I'm a Minister for Forestry and Natural Resources. For Malawi, the key challenge is the rapidly growing population. We have a population that's growing by more than 4% per annum, which is huge. And so this brings with it challenges. Challenges, access to resources. And so we find ourselves in a situation where our communities depend on the forests, they depend on landscapes for their very survival. So we have landscapes that are degraded. And so as a government, we have to now employ strategies to ensure that we restore those landscapes, which means we have to now resort to nature-based solutions in order to make sure we have restored those resources, but also in doing that, connect that, link that to development. We have pledged as a country to restore 4.5 million hectares of land restoration, which means we cannot do that as a government. We have to involve our communities. In involving our communities, we link this to livelihoods, where the community will be involved in the restoration of land, but also make livelihoods out of that restoration. In doing so, we are also addressing issues of a climate, because where there is no forest cover, you have challenges of climate. So we are now bringing together issues of landscape restoration, addressing climate challenges, but also bringing development to our people. You cannot restore landscapes without addressing issues of biodiversity. So you're restoring your landscapes. In doing so, you're restoring your biodiversity, but also your ecosystems. So these things are linked: livelihoods, development. You're also addressing issues of water. If you have livelihoods, you have restoration, you have lush forests, lush landscapes, water begins to flow. and water is life. Without water, there is no development. So all these things are interlinked.
Interesting. Let me turn to you, Director Köksal. First of all, congratulate that Turkey joined the Paris Agreement recently. And I just wanted to ask you, how do you see how this analytical tool of the bank can help also you to analyze the longer term goals Turkey has also towards net zero by the mid-century, and how we can work there together from the analytical part to also the longer term objectives of net zero?
Thank you very much for the question, Axel. As it is known, there have been industrial and information technology revolutions, and now we are witnessing the green development revolution. One of the most components of that is energy transformation, and saying that renewable energy has become increasingly significant as the main source of energy supply. Realizing this transformation, besides financial perspective, we should also consider the social aspects as well. We have to work on creating green job opportunities. The employment opportunities created by the renewable energy and energy efficiency will be the driving force of this transformation. We need to focus on benefits of green transformation to our economies rather than only the costs of combating climate change. Ensuring sustainable development is only possible with a green development revolution. As one of the founding countries of OECD and a G20 member, Turkey aims at being one of the leading countries of this era. We are going to prepare and carry out all our medium and long-term strategies, plans and practices according to this era. So actually, we don't see this revolution as a threat. On the contrary, it's a big opportunity for us to prepare our green future. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me turn back to Minister Tembo. And I think you provided a very nice overview of all the interlinkages and that need to be addressed. I think, as you said, it is complex because there are the demographic pressures, or it's huge expectations also of a country that wants to reach middle income status in the foreseeable future. So, and that puts stress on the systems. So how do you see here also the role of the World Bank, that we can help you analytically, but then also financially to see how we can be as strong of a partner in this enormous development challenge plus climate change challenge?
Yes.
That's an easy question, I guess.
Not so easy. The World Bank has been our partner. They have supported Malawi for so long, and there's, as we speak, projects that are there on the ground, supported by the World Bank. I can cite the water and sanitation project in Lilongwe, where we're getting support from the World Bank to improve the non-revenue water situation in Lilongwe. But also we have the watershed projects. We started working in the southern region where we there is what we call the nexus between agriculture, water and energy in the Shire River Basin. We are improving livelihoods through the agriculture. Communities are involved in there. The Shire River is an economic lifeline for Malawi because it provides water for drinking, it provides electricity for energy for us, but also agriculture. These watershed projects we have started in the southern region. The next phase, which starts in 2023, hopefully, will be in the central region. This is the Lintipe, Bua, and the Dwangwa basins, and I dare say the Diampwe River as well. what we hope to achieve, work with the World Bank and the support that we hope for more, is that we do not go off track on these projects. Once we move on to the 2023 one, we move on to 2026 in the northern region and the North Rukuru. We need all that support. We need us to work on these projects together, make sure that they are implemented in a speedy manner, because we need these projects. We will need them apart from addressing the immediate needs, challenges of access to water, access to livelihoods, but also restoration in these watersheds. We have, like I said earlier on, we have degraded these watersheds. We need to restore them so that we're addressing the issue of climate. We need to restore them to prevent soil erosion that leads to floods. We need to restore them so that we continue to generate electricity from the rivers along which these watersheds are. So there's so much that the World Bank can assist us on. We hope that going forward, you streamline. It takes quite a while before projects are actualized, and it really puts a strain. We have climate change that we need to address, and I think as World Bank, you have now to move with time to make sure that whatever processes we're supposed to achieve before a project starts to work, those ones are streamlined. Like I said, the 2023 one will be ready to roll, I think, hopefully. Then we move to 2026. 2026 for us can't come anytime sooner, because climate change is not waiting for us. If we need to restore these watersheds like yesterday, and yet we're looking at 2026. Is there any way we can speed up these phases so that we achieve what we're intending to achieve? Bottom line, we have to make sure our people have access to water. Our people have access to electricity. Our people have access to smart agriculture. But also, for them to have all this, we have to restore those watersheds. And in order for us to do all this, we need support from the World Bank. We need access to financing, and we hope that the World Bank can come to the table. You have the ability to convene other partners to come to the table. So that is what we're looking forward to, support from yourself, and help us to learn from best practices from other countries. So that's what we're hoping.
So let me come with some good news. Last year, we have been increasingly putting our operations into Africa. $30 billion went into Africa. And we are negotiating the IDA replenishment right now. We hope that we are getting at least 95 billion for 3 years. So there about 2/3, 70% will go to Africa. So you need to get ready to have the projects. So I will we need to work together. I think you are completely spot on. There is urgency to act. People, communities want this. What it is, however, when you also said in your project, you cannot do that only from the central government. You need to put the communities in it. That is the big role where you can come in, namely to bring it that we think we can have successful projects, but we need community involvement. We need also to have good environmental standards, because the project should not do more damage. It should be actually bringing really tangible benefit, not only in terms of nature, but also for the people that we serve. But count on us, we'll be there long term, and I think we are very excited to work with you, because I think the challenges are big. Let me now turn to Turkey. I think this is, you mentioned just in it that there were also big energy transitions happening in Turkey. How do you see this? Huge challenges, a lot of debate here also about the coal exit. Coal is sometimes very important. But you also mentioned the renewable revolution in Turkey. How do you see that, and how can the World Bank be helpful, not only from the analytical, but also from its programming point of view?
Actually, thank you very much, Axel. You have touched a very sensitive issue for not only for Turkey, but for the other developing countries. When it comes to coal, as you know, we need to transform the current coal-fire factories to abated coal-fire factories. And as you know, it is a very expensive technology. So we need to channel the required capital to the developing countries for them to convert their unabated coal-fire factories to terminals to abated ones. Actually, as you know, it is not about just burning coal to get electricity, but they are mining. There are workers who earn their lives out of it. We need to think about the social perspective about it, and I think there are so much things that World Bank can do in this transformation. We need to support those vulnerable groups who are working in the coal sector.
So this is actually a very important point that sometimes I think is not emphasized enough, is when one talks, for example, as you said, the coal exit, there is a whole social dimension. There are communities affected, jobs that are at stake. So when you close mines, or when you close also coal-fired plants, one needs to think what is happening with the people around it, what is happening with the communities. You have to have the social solutions, and then you have to build the alternatives. And the alternatives have to be better and creating new opportunities. We believe that can be done, but also require a lot of money on this. And what I think also these country climate and development reports, today with the environmental minister of Egypt, with yourself coming from Malawi and yourself from Turkey, what it shows is that we may have a toolkit where we see similar problems, but they are very different in different contracts. And that context, that complexity needs to be captured by these reports in order to identify the options available to governments, how you can best deal with this. They are not sometimes straightforward. There are sometimes hard trade-off decisions to do. But I think what we all share is a share of urgency. I think, Minister, you mentioned that people are waiting. They are being affected. And I think the longer we wait, the worse they are off. And there are additional pressures like the demographic pressures. Similarly, in your case with the energy transition, I think the longer we wait, sometimes it also becomes more complex. And how can we actually accelerate it? So what we are hoping with also this report is that we can get actually these options better worked out for governments, because ultimately it's governments that will need to take the decisions. How we involve all the actors, not only the governments, but also the communities, and particularly also the private sector. And then on the financing, how we can make sure that there is burden sharing from public sector, private sector, but also the international community coming in, and how the World Bank can contribute to this. So let me thank you for taking the time. I think what we are hoping is that we have a very robust debate in your countries, because at the end of the day, we need to give you options to have a better future. And I think this is what we're going to do and hopefully achieve with this. Thank you very much for joining, and thank you, and see you again.
Thank you.
Thank you.